This video is going to serve as the exit interview for our 2023 GR86 Premium with manual gearbox. It's a car we've put nearly 14,000 miles on, and we purchased it in 2022 in January. Since then, we've done track days with it. We've driven it through 2 separate winter seasons. We've done road trips and the daily grind. We've done our best to experience this car as in many conditions as possible to simulate what it would be like to actually live with this car long term. What do I think about it? Well, we're going to try to address that in this video, starting with some of the boring stuff: maintenance, reliability, and what's gone wrong. Let's start with maintenance and fuel economy. Fuel economy numbers, they aren't great, and to be fair to this vehicle, it's gone through extreme cold, it's been on winter tires, and Hankook RS4 extreme summer tires for most of its life. With the Bridgestone WS90s, you were getting, let's call it mid 22, 23 miles per gallon. With the RS4s, you're getting a little bit over 23 on the highway, and its combined lifetime fuel economy is 23.8. As a reference, if you back-to-back this with something like a B58 powered Supra with a manual gearbox or an IS500, both of those cars, which produce way more power than this vehicle, return similar fuel economy numbers on the highway. I think that's largely attributed to the increased displacement of this 2.4 liter and, of course, the gearing of this manual gearbox. Maintenance. Oil changes are dirt cheap on this car. It has a little bit over 5 quarts of oil. You run full synthetic. You can get in and out of your dealer, or if you do it yourself, for under $100, which is a plus. Tires on this car and their stock consumables like rotors are all very, very cheap. That's one of the pros of running something like this compared to, we'll call it, a higher horsepower car like a Supra or a Mustang or a Camaro. Your day-to-day living expenses with the GR86 are going to be relatively low. What's gone wrong? Well, the steering wheel has had some QC issues, which got replaced by the dealer. They've had a buzzy air conditioning fan or fan in the car and some rattles and squeaks. Nothing major. The RTV issue and the engine reliability issues with this car is the next thing I'm going to bring up. I have become the whisperer for all of your problems. Every single time someone blows up their GR86, they seem to reach out to me directly to talk about it. And now's the time I'm going to do that. I've probably had a dozen people reach out to me with engine problems with the GR86, and their experiences have varied. They've either blown it up on the track or just putting down the highway, and putting, I'm sure, means flat out down the highway. That said, the dealers have been sort of the crux of this problem. Depending on where they are, the dealers either warranty them with no issue, they put them on loaner and it's a positive experience, or they get totally screwed. And that's sort of the disappointment part about this car, because your experience with it may vary upon where you're getting its service. And the sad part is, most of the people who've blown up their cars on track have run into a ton of pushback. And for a car that's being sold as a track day car that you are given a NASA membership in, that is a huge disappointment. That's hopefully something that Toyota is going to address in the future. And it does make me somewhat hesitant to recommend this to someone with total peace of mind if they're going to track this 24/7 or take it on an autocross every weekend. That's a concern I have potentially for some of the owners of this car. Other thing to talk about is the RTV issue. Is it a problem? Well, we talked about it in our last video. Yes or no? Is it a bad thing that RTV is making its way into the oil pickup? Probably. Is it causing engine failures? It's hard to say. These cars don't have oil pressure gauges as factory, and the people I know who track these cars, who run race series around them, people like Mike and David at Counterspace Garage, who've been a very helpful partner and know this car probably better than anybody, say maybe. If you look at the oil pickup design, it would take a shitload of RTV to cause a full blockage. And it's hard to say because these cars also don't have oil coolers as factory or real oil coolers, so you can run the oil quite thin if you run this for a long period of time, and they don't have baffled oil pans, so you could run into an oil starvation problem anyway. So it's hard. I mean, I want to be able to give you a definitive answer, but I can't. That said, if you go to your dealer like I did, it depends on which dealer you talk to. Some will preemptively clear out your oil pickup, or some will make you pay for it. My dealer, working in the Illinois region, could not get it pre-approved to get pulled, so I had to take it to an independent shop. So I took it to AFA in Downers Grove. They are complete gentlemen. They helped us out. They dropped my oil pan. Yes, there was RTV in there, just like the other car we did it to in our last video. Did it totally block my oil pickup? No, and I've run into 0 oil consumption issues. But again, your mileage may vary. Let's talk about modifications next. The mod market has opened up. You can tune these cars. as our friend Amir did with his. And it's an expensive process. By the time you're done with the dyno fees and all that other fun stuff and the EQ Tech license, you're looking at about $3,000 depending on what shop you go to. You gain 20 to 40 horsepower depending on if you go E85, 93, 91. And best case scenario, say you gain 30 horsepower to the wheels. It's nearly $1,000 per 10 horsepower. Is that worth it? Leave that up to you, because you're probably also opening yourself up to further reliability problems, at least long term. And if you're doing it, you should definitely do an oil cooler at that point and definitely do an oil pan. What we did to this car is we did a street track approach. I wanted to modify this car in the same fashion Mark did his personal S2000. A modification strategy that, while it did not fully make this the most capable track car that ever lived, I wanted to be able to track it on the weekends, take it to autocrosses, take it to time trials, not worry about anything, and not totally make my street life miserable. So we started doing this by first running this car on its stock tires, stock wheels. We upgraded the pads and fluid. We were running Counter Space Garage CP pads. Then we went to Apex Arc wheels combined with Hankook RS4s and 245s. That was sort of the best bang for buck, particularly if you do camber bolts with that. You have a very streetable, trackable car that's only going to cost you a couple G's to have a good time. Then we went to the next stage. We added S6 AP Sprint Kit brakes, which are extraordinarily capable. And if you are going to do heavy track use, I highly recommend this big brake kit. It has no fade, great pedal feedback, and it's not something I ever worry about anymore, to be honest. Then we did Öhlins Road and Track dampers. They ride great. We had to do camber arms in the rear and camber plates in the front. The one thing to note about the camber plates is they are very noisy. These are Racing camber plates. Sadly, Öhlins no longer has their camber plates in stock, which are silent. These are not. And they're the biggest detractor to the suspension setup, because past that, in every street regards, it's better than the stock suspension. The other thing I'm gonna bring up about our modification strategy is you could probably do it for cheaper. If you picked, let's call it, less expensive parts in certain areas, you could get a lot of this experience for less money. But the way we did it, with all the parts and the wheels and tires and all that other fun stuff, it's about $7,000 to $8,000, which makes this car, which is a little bit over $30,000, nearly 40 grand all in, and that's before PPF and any of that other fun stuff. Is it worth it? Well, we're gonna talk to Mark later in this video in our dry segment to address that, but that is something to note. This car now costs as much as something like a used SS1 Elite, Camaro, used Corvette. Day one when we got this car, we took it to Chicago Auto Pros. They PPF the front clip, the rockers, they ceramic coated it, and they tinted it and put PPF over the rear trunk lip. Did it work? Well, this car has been tracked a ton and the PPF has done its job. We've had no real paint chips or scratches of any kind that I can report. And the undercarriage of this car, by taking those simple steps, washing it, not letting it get too salty, doing your best to avoid letting it sit for long periods of time with salt caked on it, there's almost no corrosion anywhere on this car. The interior, however, is a different story. Once you start putting pets and people who live in filth like Mark in this car, things like your carpets and your seats start to take a beating. So, with that in mind, let's hear from Mark.
All right, thanks, Jack. And thanks to all the viewers that have been around here forever. If you know anything and you follow this channel, circa 2013 is when I got my FRS. It reignited my passion for cars. It really kickstarted and took my video making desires. I was always passionate about it, but never really had a medium to do it. Now here we are 10 years later. Now granted, I haven't been doing it full time for 10 years, but I think being in this car again makes me feel a little bit odd. It's not my car, so there's some rose-colored glasses, but that sense of like love-hate towards it still exists. And I think it's the philosophical debate of what a car is, why it's good, why it's bad, changes. You know, you're not the same when you're 15 as when you're 25 or 25 to 30 or on and on. Because your life experience changes, the things that you like and you don't like also evolves. Your perspective has changed, and my perspective has changed a lot in 10 years doing this. The more cars I've driven, the more people I've met from the industry, the professional side, the business side. I am no longer a normal person that drives cars. So I want to be clear that while I've driven some amazing cars, coming back to a vehicle like this and looking at it for what it is really helped me a lot, and namely driving it on track, which we're going to cut to in a minute. But I think Jack brought up a great point of all these modifications. The thing is, you don't have to do all those things to enjoy driving. You really don't. You can focus on your own driving and get a lot out of this car. But the other point I want to make is cars are incredibly expensive now. The FRS was like $26,000 or $27,000. Now this is well over $30,000. You have Honda Civics that are $50,000. You have Corollas that are over $40,000. I mean, it's mind-boggling. You want to get to real sports cars, hardcore stuff, $70,000, $80,000, $100,000+. So, you know, you're dealing with also almost unobtainium type properties, and then you have to keep them good. You know, a lot of people don't want to buy a sports car with 50, 70,000 miles on it. So keeping these things in good condition are also carry a heavy expense. Jack talked about the exterior, the Chicago Auto Pros part of paint correction, PPF, ceramic coating, interior coatings on Alcantara, dashboard, plastics. And the other thing we're running into now, and we're going to start using these more, is I saw it when Yuri and Jacob started using Tux mats on the straight pipes. And we've been running WeatherTech mats or all-season mats from the dealership for a long time, and I have it in my X7 as a camera car. My carpets are still stained from the salt in the winter, and if you're in Canada, you know this as well. We're in the Midwest. My trunk mat's curling up in the back and slides around. I still have scratches and carpet messed up in the back for that mat, and I just, like, it's so frustrating because it's always one more thing. When I talked to the owners of Tux Mats, I was like, why are you trying to do a duplicate product of WeatherTech? You know, like, what's the advantage? And they're kind of like on that same thing. Like, we have cars that there's still salt stains that we can't get out on carpet. We want something with better coverage. If you have pets, you have all this, or like us, we're bringing cars to the track or we're having people in and out of them. In our own cars, it's the worst because they get more abuse. Now that we've used some of these Tux mats in multiple cars, and I'm going to put in my X7, Jack's got it in a Mazda 3 and he's got his dog in there, the coverage on them is way better. And I think it's one more step and one more thing that you're going to find that if you're spending $40,000+ on a car and you want to keep it nice and you're in bad weather, that actually these mats are better than what we've used before. And you know, no floor mat's going to be as nice as like a really good carpeted mat. I love carpeted mats. I like the softness. There's better sound deadening capability with it as well. It's not as like echoey, but from a pure cost perspective, I would rather have carpet underneath that's not destroyed than having salt all over it running like an inferior mat. So I'm going to show Tux mats more going forward just so you can see what it looks like. If you consider it over like a WeatherTech mat or like the factory mats, it might actually save you money in the long term. But other than that, you know, there's so many things that you have to do to a car. It's incredible. It's so much money. Not only that, just the maintenance. But right now, we're going to take this to the track. We're going to take it to the track because I want to talk through the experience of driving this car and what it's really like. And again, it's about perspective. All these cars we've driven now, what is the overall experience that the GR86 brings in like 2023? Whoa! Don't ride too much curb.
So we're in our GR86, or my GR86, long term. This is sort of our wrap-up video on this car, and you have yet to drive this flat out on the track. You were all sour about it on the street, like, why would you spend all this money? It's a 4-cylinder. Well, Mark, this 4-cylinder, at least according to our data, with its street-based, track-based modifications, is faster than a stock FL5 Type R, it's faster than a Elantra N, it's faster than a GR Corolla. In fact, all of the all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive hatchbacks, at least around here on Autobahn South. How does this car feel now that you're at the limits?
It's been unbelievable. I'll be honest, man. Now that we've done all this hot hatch driving and high performance, like high-end cars, I'm back in love with this car again because I think what you get for the money, and if you ever want to modify it, it's one of the best driver's cars that you can buy right now. And yes, it's still a Subaru engine, and it's got all those problems as a Subaru, but to drive it, honestly, it's just such an amazing experience. You can learn so much driving this car flat out. It's so approachable, all the limits. And I think really, you know, the Miata is also an amazing car, but this is way more usable and it can be way faster as a street car and of course a track car, I think, unless you want to go racing.
I guess my question for you then, Mark, I mean, you've modified your S2000 over the years with essentially the exact same parts. You have an SX Big Brake Kit, the Sprint Kit. We're both running counter space garage pads. We both have all-leans. We have some requisite camber modifications to get this car, or these cars, to perform out here, and we're running the exact same tire. How does this compare?
It's faster. I mean, you have to do aero work. You have to do so much work to the S2000 to get this car to be, or to get that car to be anywhere near as fast as this. And it's just, this is in a lot of ways a better driving car. I think just all the inputs, everything's more refined. The S2000 has the better engine and gearbox, but I mean, we're splitting hairs, honestly. I think you can get this car with a warranty. Look at the shit that we can do with it. You just have to manage like thermals, like heat, if you're really punishing
and
this
oiling.
thing. What's that?
And oiling, of course.
Yeah, oiling, of course.
But Mark, I think with this and our time out here on Autobahn, it's time to wrap up our video on this GR86, sir.
All right, Jack, let's do it. So it's pretty obvious that this still is a special driving experience. I talked about this at my beginning of my long diatribe. You know, as much as your perspective changes, one thing is consistent. A good driver's car is a good driver's car. And that's what this is. It's not overly flashy. It's more of a classic shape and design. The interior, you know, as much as it is simple and an oddity in this car, in the car industry, it works for its intended purpose. And over time, I've grown to appreciate what this is even more and more. Now, yes, taking it on track is different than street driving it. If you're street driving it, you essentially have to do nothing to this other than tires. If you want to take it to the track, all you need is some tires. You know, throw some sticky ass Bridgestones on here and call it a day. Do some brake pads from Counter Space Garage. They'll last you, unless you're stupid, they're going to last you a long time. And brake fluid. That is it, and you're going to be flying in this car. Taking it to the next level is nothing more complicated than doing suspension. And there's so many brands like, again, see it, Counter Space Garage, you have Öhlins, you have, I mean, you just pick one. The amount of knowledge base that's out there is incredible to make this car better. Now, of course, there's braking solutions like we work with Jeff from Essex Brakes for the AP stuff. And, you know, I put them on all my cars because you just never have to worry about brakes. You can brake so much more confidently deeper. But again, none of that stuff is completely necessary to make this a good driving car. There's not a lot of caveats to buying this and enjoying it. The aftermarket is a huge part because there's so much availability for it, so we have to talk about it. But the engine is kind of the X factor here with this RTV, and Jack talked about it. We're seeing every engine come in with RTV and the oil pickup and the oil pan. And we've talked to people, we've talked to Toyota, and they're saying that it's not the root cause of engine failure on these cars. It's still oiling or oil pressure, whatever. And I will tell you, yeah, it's not going to fail on you while it's under warranty. And that's the problem. So if they're not going to do it under warranty, I really do think it's a quality issue, but you know, they don't warranty quality issues. They don't do it until it's broken. Just spend the couple $100 to have the oil pan pulled off and cleaned out. That way you're not having to think about it. You know, all it takes to skim a bearing from oil pressure loss, namely running 0-20 in the heat, is just oil pressure loss. You can skim a bearing at high heat at any point in time. So having the RTV out of the pan is something you should do. That's the long story short. Everything else about this car, now that I've driven it again, now that I've really thought about it, it is definitely one of those cars that is special because of the price. It's an amazing driving tool. It's an amazing learning car because you don't have excessive amounts of horsepower that you can utilize all of it, and it's still fast when you set it up right. And you can still enjoy the hell out of it. There's not 16 different electromechanical systems from adaptive sway bars or adaptive dampers or the braking systems doing that. There's not all that complication. It's the closest thing to you in a car in the modern era that you can get, and that you don't have to budget around and plan for like 20 years to buy one. I think that's the beautiful part about this car. And that's why I've appreciated it more and more as car prices have gone up and cars have gotten off the deep end and unobtainable and unavailable and complicated to fix. And this car maintains, it's a diamond in the rough, and it's rear wheel drive with a manual parking brake, a manual transmission. So, I go back to when I started this, and it really is a lot of the same reasons I loved it then, and it's one of the major reasons why it's even more special now. If you're on the fence about it and you've been through a lot of cars, you've been through the horsepower experience and sports cars experience, and you don't want to spend a lot of money, this is one of the few cars in this price point that exists on the planet. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.